Good morning, Stewart's Chapel. This is Brother Don Pierson, and Don Counts here, and it is Thursday's Devotional. We're here in the empty family life worship area and still missing the gathering. However, I got to admit, it was great to see you all this past Sunday here as we gathered for the drive-in service, and so continue to pray for you and hope to see you this coming Sunday at 10 o'clock. So let's go to Acts chapter 16 as we continue our look into individuals that encountered Jesus that are described as a man or a woman of. And this is a woman of Thyatira. Thyatira is today known as, I don't know whether I'll get this pronounced right. It's today is known as Akhisar. It's in western Turkey, south of Istanbul. It's a long ways from Philippi. It's known for a reddish purple dye. And so we encounter this woman known Lydia of Thyatira, but she's living in Philippi, which is a great distance from Thyatira. So, verse 11, therefore, sailing from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrace, and the next day came to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the foremost city of the part of Macedonia, a colony. And we were staying in that city for some days, and on the Sabbath day, we went out of the city to the riverside, where prayer was customarily made. In other words, it was known by the people of Philippi as a place of prayer. And so that's where they go. We went out there and we sat down and began to speak to the women that were meeting there. Interesting. No man, it's a small gathering of women that gathered there for prayer at the riverside. And it reminds me so much of Belize. Because if you went down to the creek or the river, you rarely would find men. You might find some small boys. But that's where you would find the women. Gathered at the river, there'd be great conversation going around because they would be down there doing their laundry, washing them against the rock, in the creek, in the river, and their children would be running back and forth in the water as they did it. It was a time of conversation. And in the middle of the day when it was warm and hot and you wanted to go somewhere to find a group to talk to, going down to the river was a good place. It says, now a certain woman named Lydia heard us. So she was there. She was a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira who worshiped God. The Lord opened her heart to heed. Now, notice it doesn't say hear, but to heed or pay attention to the things that Paul was speaking, which would have been the gospel, which would have been Jesus. When she and her household were baptized, she begged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. So she persuaded us. Very short section of scripture. Lydia was an influential woman even before the Lord. But when she becomes the Lord, she also becomes influential. She was very persuasive. She became another woman that was a provider for the disciples. Sort of like Mary Magdalene, who took of her wealth and sacrificially gave to support the ministry of Jesus. Here, the same thing is happening for Paul and his followers, his disciples. She had a gift of hospitality. She had no problem in opening up her home. She was a Gentile. Like Cornelius, as we looked at, like Cornelius, she was a person of prayer. She was a God seeker. She evidently was one who feared God. But again, she is one who is lost. And like I said when we talked about Cornelius, it's very rare that you find in Scripture where you find one who is really seeking God, that God doesn't just show up and give them the truth about who Jesus is and about how God has sent His Son to save them. Well, the same thing happens with Lydia. She hears the gospel. She hears about Jesus through Paul. And she doesn't just hear it, she heeds it. She pays attention. She makes a commitment to it. So what does a woman of Thyatira who becomes a person of faith, Well, what happens with them? What do they do? Well, she seems to be a hungry person. This hunger was there before she became a follower of Jesus, but it seems to stay after. I think she wanted Paul and the disciples to stay with her because there would still be more of those conversations. Remember, she's just heard about the gospel. There's a lot that she doesn't know. She's a brand new believer. And those days that Paul and them will stay there will become powerful for her. I've heard that story, and over again as I did missions and traveled around the world, I would meet someone. I remember meeting a translator in Gaza who shared with me about his sister and how when she was a Muslim and his family were Muslims, and when she became a believer, how he and his brothers and his fathers and uncles took her and beat her and cast her out. It went for some time and he didn't see her. But every time he saw her, she was happy. She was filled with joy. Then one day, her influence, just the joy, affected him. And he wanted to know about that joy she had. And he fell in love with Jesus. And I remember as he would take me around translating from house to house, from Muslim home to Muslim home, how he would translate for me. And he would share about the impact that staying, because his father did the same thing to him as they had done to her, and how she took him in. And as a new believer, how living with his sister made him strong. She's faithful. She's persuasive. She's very, very visible. And there was no delay. There was an urgency with Lydia from the time she heard the message and the time she received. That's why I like the word where it says she obeyed or heeded the message. She just didn't hear. It sounds like she hears the message one time and immediately she becomes a follower. How many times have you heard the message of God's love for you through Jesus, and yet you're still not committed? Love you, Stewart's Chapel.